seated. Let's go back on the record. Again, let the record reflect all counsel are present as well as the defendants. Let me just ask, counsel, have we reached any agreement on defendants B1 through 4? I think that was it. Was that what we
B4 specifically.
B4.
B4.
Okay.
We have, Your Honor. The state does not object.
Okay. Then B4 will be admitted without objection.
At this time, I'd like to show from the 23rd second of this video taken by Alexander Thungston to the 2-minute and 9-second mark.
Okay. This video depicts you and Officer Hernandez creating distance.
Yes.
And you did so in order to create a safety barrier between you and Mr. Boyd.
Correct.
And you agree with me that there is a high-end show of force that is aiming the weapon at Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
And why is that done?
Because he's still threatening us with our lives, with the knives.
Now, what words specifically is Mr. Boyd using to threaten your lives?
He's saying he's going to kill us.
How is Mr. Boyd saying those words?
He's angry. He's yelling them at us.
As you heard those words and saw the expression on Mr. Boyd's face, did you have any doubts as to whether he was sincere in carrying out the threats he made against you?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
I think this is proper lay opinion. I'll allow the answer to stand overruled.
Now, at about 5:01 p.m., you asked the radio operator to clear the air, is that right?
Yes.
So, when it says air is 10-3, what does that mean?
It's just somebody else will get on the radio and talk, and the air is basically clear for our transmissions and the people responding to that call.
Why do you clear the air in a situation like the one that you faced?
If we have an emergency, we can get on the air quicker without somebody interrupting.
Now I'd like to play for you another portion of your video, the negotiations that you and Officer Hernandez had with Mr. Boyd. I'm specifically playing from what is marked as Exhibit B4 from your taser video, the time 7:40 to 9:15, and we're also referring to the transcript, which we have marked as Exhibit D1, and we are going from page 15, line 8, to page 17, line 16, and that's what we're going to present to the court at this time.
Okay.
Mr. Boyd threatened your knives with lies, you and Officer Hernandez began the process of establishing a dialogue with Mr. Boyd. Is that right?
Yes.
You and Officer Hernandez went from giving orders to drop the knife to asking him Mr. Boyd questions about his welfare.
Yes.
Despite the fact that Mr. Boyd wasn't necessarily responsive, you sought to find out information from him that you could use to try and de-escalate the situation.
Yes.
So despite the fact that Mr. Boyd threatened your lives, you still wanted to work with him and try to find a peaceful resolution to this standoff with him.
Yes.
Now, again, while you were interacting and negotiating with Mr. Boyd, how would Mr. Boyd continue to threaten you all with the knives?
He kept them out, and he stated he wanted to kill us.
With the court's permission, I'd like the witness to demonstrate how Mr. Boyd threatened the officers after that initial encounter and now that they're starting to negotiate with him.
Okay.
If you would you please demonstrate how Mr. Boyd was threatening you?
He would just hold the knives out, and he would start to walk towards us, and then we'd tell him to stop. Then he'd stop, he'd back up, and he just kept going at us, back.
When Mr. Boyd approached you, aside from telling him to stop, what did you do to show him that he needed to stop?
What did we do to show him?
Yes, in terms of a show of force.
Oh, we pointed our weapons at him,
Okay.
and then we'd tell him to drop the knives.
Now, was that high-end show of force, drawing a weapon in Mr. Boyd's direction, sufficient to stop him from approaching you?
It seemed to be working sometimes, yeah.
Now, at about 5:08, and that's when Sergeant Jason Carpenter and Officer Christopher Wetterman arrived, is that right?
Yes.
Now, when Sergeant Carpenter arrived, what did you tell him and Officer Wetterman about what Mr. Boyd had done to you?
We explained to him that he threatened us with the knives. He had 2 knives in his hands.
Now, at this time, I'd like to play another portion of the video which has been marked Exhibit B1 from 11:51 to 12:38, and also referring to Exhibit D1, which is the transcript of that video, page 20, line 7 to page 22, line 3. Now, that was a portion of the audio, because the video doesn't really show it, where Mr. Boyd was told to not to get any closer or he would be beanbagged.
Correct.
Now, from what you were able to observe from Mr. Boyd's behavior and reaction, how well was he able to understand those commands?
He barely understood it, but he still came forward.
At this time, I'd like to play yet another portion of Exhibit B4, which is the Alexander fixed-in video. And I'm asking to play minute 10 to a minute 11:02. what did Mr. Boyd have in his hands as he was approaching the officer?
The knives.
And how was Mr. Boyd holding those knives?
Just give me a display. Had him in his hands like this.
Objection, Your Honor, best evidence.
I'm sorry, what was your objection?
Best evidence.
I'll allow them to demonstrate it, counsel.
Yeah, in this matter.
Okay, so Mr. Boyd had the knives in his hands with the blades open, and the blades essentially pointed towards the officers he was approaching.
Yes.
You can take a seat. Now, there came a time when a CIT officer named Officer Monet arrived on scene, is that right?
Yes.
And you knew that he was a crisis intervention team officer.
Yes.
And that officer attempted to negotiate with Mr. Boyd.
Yes.
And you were there and present and witnessed that attempt at negotiations, is that fair?
Yes.
Now I'd like to play, once again, Exhibit B1 from 1838 to 2449, and also refer to Exhibit D1, the transcript, and from page 30, line 13, to page 37, line 9. Officer Monet speak to Mr. Boyd.
Yes.
And you also witnessed Mr. Boyd's reaction and responses to Officer Monet.
Yes.
Now, based on those observations, is it fair to say that Officer Monet attempted to establish a dialogue with Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
And in fact, Officer Monet attempted to establish a rapport with him.
Correct.
He asked questions about how long you've been in this area. Is that right?
Yes.
Asked about Mr. Boyd's water needs, his hunger, basic human needs. Is that right?
Yes.
At all times, Officer Monet tried to explain to Mr. Boyd that a conversation really couldn't take place until we put down the knives. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
And that in return for Mr. Boyd cooperating with the officers and putting away the knives, he can be given a voucher where he could stay in a motel for a week.
Yes.
Now, what did Mr. Boyd do in response to those requests, those questions, and those efforts by Officer Monet to try and de-escalate the situation and resolve it in a peaceful manner?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
What was Mr. Boyd's response to Officer Monet's efforts to try and resolve this incident in a peaceful manner?
He wasn't willing to negotiate.
At this time, I'd like to play another video, and before I do that, Your Honor, I would ask the court respectfully if you could turn up the volume and make the video easier to listen to, because that's outside our control. At this time, I'd like to play Exhibit B1, and I'm playing from the 28 minutes, 59 seconds to 30 minutes and 31 seconds, and also referring to Exhibit D, the transcript, page 41, line 1 through page 43, line 1.
I know what happened before. I got hurt before I did. I just put it up. Well, how about we all you took the right over here, work right here, but this person won't do that. And we'll talk. Hey, and I'll tell you this though, this is what we will do. I'm thinking, I'm going to put those knives up, and then everybody back around you, and you have the weapons, and we go from there.
Now, there came a point when tactical officers arrived and removed the field officers, including the open space officers, from their interaction with James Boyd. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when they did so, you were brought down the hill, so to speak, to the service road.
Yes.
Now, when you were at the service road, did you have an opportunity to talk to a canine officer named Officer Ken Ronzo?
Yes.
And, you know, again, we're going to play the video of your interaction with him, but did you speak to Ken Ronzo and tell him what happened?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, I'd like to play Exhibit B1B, which is, again, Officer McDaniel's taser camera video. And we're playing from the 27 minutes, 28 seconds to the end of this video that is already admitted in evidence.
Your Honor, where we stand?
Pause it for a moment.
I'm sorry.
Maybe approach.
Yes.
Because I've forgotten if I announced exactly what I'm playing from that exhibit. I'm playing from the 27 minutes, 28 seconds to the end of that video.
Okay.
Where we stand? What happened? Go back to the camp. And we'll go to the gym. And, go a party line. Okay. And we put up, so we put out his own phone, so we got off and had a big one. And we couldn't show it.
Is it correct to say that you wanted K-9 Officer Ken Rosendome to know the level of threat he was facing when he was eventually going to deal with Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
I'd like to take a moment to confer, Your Honor.
Okay.
No further questions. Pass the witness.
Mr. Bergman?
So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So once Mr. Boyd pulled these knives out on you, at that point, was it your intention that you were going to eventually arrest him?
Yes.
And what were you going to arrest him for?
Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon on a peace officer.
Okay, and is that a felony?
Yes.
Okay. And by the way, I know this is perhaps the longest you've talked about what has happened on that night, but has anybody from the DA's office, the special prosecutors, or anybody else ever indicated to you or other law enforcement that you did anything wrong in
No.
this?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance?
Sustained.
If I could have just a moment.
Okay.
Just a moment. One more thing. So, the city ordinance that originally was violated, that's a misdemeanor, correct?
Yes, it's a misdemeanor crime.
That's originally what you went up for, and it's a misdemeanor crime to illegally camp in an open space area without a permit, right?
Correct.
And that's an arrestable offense, actually, isn't it?
Yes.
And you sometimes you have to make an arrest in that situation from time
Yes.
to time. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that also another reason why you want to make sure that if you have to make an arrest, that someone doesn't have knives on them?
Yes.
And that's why perhaps you might do a pat down of them.
Correct.
That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Officer McDaniel, I think we saw about 5 or 6 different video clips, but the sum of it is that you and the other officers, did you keep your distance for the most part away from Mr. Boyd the entire time you were speaking with him?
Yes.
Did anybody at that point shoot Mr. Boyd?
No.
Officer Monette, in talking to Mr. Boyd, seemed to be suggesting you could get him a hotel for a week. Do you know whether that's true?
I'm sure they can make arrangements, but I'm not positive.
And just so I'm clear, you said on your cross-examination with the defense that before you tried to pat him down, there was nothing that suggested to you that he was mentally ill.
Correct.
Nothing that he said suggested to you he was mentally ill?
No.
Question has to answer.
Sustained.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Go ahead.
I'm showing you what's been previously admitted as State's Exhibit 2. This is the Albuquerque Police Department standard operating procedure on response to the mentally ill or suspected mentally ill and people in crisis. Are you trained on this SOP?
Objection. Question is outside the scope of cross-examination and also outside the scope of direct.
I would join that.
Your Honor, this is an impeachment.
We'll allow the state to proceed at this point.
Are you trained on this SOP?
Yes.
In this SOP that you're trained on, it reads Section 2-1301, recognizing abnormal behavior, and that's related to people with mental illness, is it not?
Yes.
And under subsection D, it says other specific behaviors, correct?
Yes.
Part 2, it says delusions of grandeur, is that right?
Yes.
And you know, because we've all watched it played out on the videos and read from through the course of your examination, that the transcript of your video has been entered into evidence. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Go ahead.
This is a portion of State's Exhibit 8. Beginning on page 2 of State's Exhibit 8, line 23 and 24. In that video that we saw, Mr. Boyd said, "I've done nothing wrong. Look, I've been calling you all for 5 months, okay?"
Okay.
He said that?
Yes.
On page 3, beginning at line 2, you said, "All right, now do me a favor and have a seat right over there." And Mr. Boyd responded, "I'm doing you a favor, but I have a matter of national security." Right?
Yes.
Did you believe that Mr. Boyd had any matter of national security when you were addressing him?
No.
Now, you also said that when you turned him around or attempted to pat him down, he said, "Don't touch me."
Correct.
That's what you testified here today?
Right.
Finally, on page 3, the truth is, line 9, what he said was, "Please don't touch me."
Objection leading.
Rephrase the question, Sustained.
Is it correct that he said, "Please don't touch me"?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
I'll allow you to recross on that issue, counsel.
I don't have any recross on this, Mr. Rogers, so I don't have that here.
When Mr. Boyd told you that please don't touch him, did that essentially keep you from fulfilling the duty that was necessary to ensure your safety, and that is to pat him down?
Yes.
So when someone asks you, "Please don't touch me," and you have the lawful right to pat him down, do you still do so?
Yes.
And the reason you do that is to ensure your safety, find any weapons, and prevent the suspect from doing something they might regret later.
Correct.
But Mr. Boyd didn't give you that opportunity, and instead he took the knives that you saw and tried to pat down and take from him and used them to threaten you.
Correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. May this witness be excused from the case? State.
You may, Your Honor. Thank you.
Defense?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
State next calls Sergeant, New Mexico State Police Sergeant Chris Ware. And Your Honor, with Sergeant Ware, we'll be playing a very short video. But I think we'll need to do the input from the podium. I think we'll just...
Raise your right hand. You swear or affirm under the penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Please be seated.
Good afternoon. Could you introduce yourself and tell us what you do for a living, please?
My name is Chris Ware. I'm a sergeant with the New Mexico State Police.
About how long have you been doing that, Sergeant Ware?
Coming up on 18 years.
Now, is it correct that, as it relates to this case, you arrived on scene after being dispatched because James Boyd asked for New Mexico State Police at one point?
Yes.
In the course of being dispatched here, did you also come across Keith Sandy, who you knew from New Mexico State Police beforehand?
Yes, I did.
So about what time were you dispatched on March 16th, 2014?
I don't recall exact times. Somewhere around 4 p.m. or 3:30, 4 p.m.
And do you know what part of Albuquerque you drove to?
Yes, the foothills.
Sir, could you scoot a little closer to the microphone, please?
In the foothills off of Copper, call the exact address.
When you arrived and got out of your car, did you come across anybody who you knew?
Yes, I did.
Who was that?
Detective Keith Sandy.
And how did you know Detective Keith Sandy?
He used to work for the New Mexico State Police.
And was that at the same time that you had?
Yes.
What was Detective Sandy doing when you came across him?
I was kind of walking around looking for the scene. While I was walking around, I saw Detective Sandy pull up, get out of his truck, and start putting his equipment on.
So it appeared that he had just arrived?
Yes.
Did you talk to him about why you were there at the scene?
Briefly, yes.
Now help us understand how the New Mexico State Police camera and microphone systems work.
Well, most of our police units are equipped with the Coban system. Once you engage your emergency lights, the camera inside the vehicle turns on, as well as the microphone on your belt.
So is it fair to say that the camera is on the dash of the car, but the microphone's on your person?
Yes.
When you came to the scene to respond on March 16th, did you have your lights on?
Yes, I
So
did.
was your camera and belt microphone recording?
Yes, it was.
Now, have you watched and listened to the camera recording of your interaction with Detective Sandy that day?
Yes, I have.
Is that camera and recording fairly and accurately depict the view from the dashboard and the audio picked up by your microphone when you spoke to him?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this time we move the admission of States Exhibit 12A and B, and 13, and my understanding is 13, which is a transcript, is stipulated to by the defense.
Well, let me ask the defense, any objection to these exhibits being admitted?
If I'm not mistaken, Your Honor, I did stipulate to 13, that's in. I just have a question as far as, since I've just received this morning, what all is on this?
So,
Is it just what's on the transcript?
State's Exhibit 12 is no transcript, just that short portion of the video. State's Exhibit 12B is with the words from the transcript, same on the video.
And that's it, that's the only.
Yes, sir.
So I don't have any objection.
Mr. Rule?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. The 12A and B and 13 will be admitted without objection.
I want to play this. I want to make sure that, if I may, Your Honor, has the court changed the input over to the
I
podium?
think they had the wires crossed, and I think I put it, it should be on defense, right?
Actually, I think what we need is the podium at
The
this point,
podium,
Your Honor, because
okay.
that's the input up here.
Is that, you need the other one?
Oh, there we go. All right. Here we are. All right. At some point when you arrived, did you encounter APD personnel other than Detective Keith Sandy?
I believe I met another state police officer, and he went towards the back of one of the residences towards the foothills. I may have seen another APD officer walking around, but I don't recall talking with him.
Was there a point in time where you were trying to figure out what had happened and you asked the question of why they didn't just have him move 300 yards off-site?
I was already on the other side of the residence where I'd parked in the foothills when that conversation took place.
And why did you ask about the idea of moving someone over 300 yards or so?
I didn't know the whole story behind why the officers were there in the first place. I thought it was just because he was camped there illegally.
Is there a portion of that land 300 yards to the north or so that is not open space and is instead National State Park?
I believe there's a fence line that separates the open space and the national forest within view of where I was standing.
And do you have an understanding of whether it's legal to camp on the other side of that fence line?
To my knowledge, it is. I don't know. I don't work for the Forest Service, but to my knowledge, it is. I don't see why it wouldn't be.
At some point in your time there, did you have any interactions with James Boyd?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about those.
Well, after speaking with, I believe it was a sergeant to see what exactly was going on, why he requested state police. I walked up towards where Mr. Boyd was standing, asked him what was going on, what he needed from state police. Just kind of tried to get a feel for what he wanted to do, what the APD officers were asking him to do. He just kind of went off on tangents and saying he was a spy for the Department of Energy or some kind of an agent. Just random things that made no sense and were not believable. Talked to him maybe for a minute or two. At that point, I decided he's not speaking coherently. He's not making sense, and it's hard to believe anything that he was telling me.
Was he making any threats that you heard?
I had asked him to put his knives down and come down and talk to us to get things taken care of and maybe get him a hotel room. I think the APD officers that were talking to him had offered him a hotel room. as soon as I mentioned putting his knives down and coming down, he escalated, got mad, and I don't remember exact words, but he started cussing, and that's all I remember.
Did you ever see him pull out his knives, or did he have them in his hands when you interacted with him?
No, he didn't.
Did you ever get close to him, or did you always maintain distance away from him?
I maintained a distance of at least 30 feet, 30 to 40 feet.
And maintaining that distance of 30 or 40 feet, is that consistent with your training that you received?
Yes.
The whole time that you've maintained distance, were you ever in reach of his knives if he would have brought them out?
No, I was not.
After, and so in the whole time that you maintained distance, you were never a threat, I'm sorry, that you were never in threat range of his knives, did you ever have to shoot him?
No.
After that interaction, where were you sent?
I just walked down the hill and met with one of my officers. I sent him around the north side of the hillside where Mr. Boyd was standing with the K-9 officer, APD K-9 officer, and I just stayed at the bottom of the hill, offered any assistance the state police could provide.
About how long do you recall waiting down there on the perimeter before the shooting happened?
Somewhere, give or take an hour or so, hour, 15 minutes.
I didn't hear you.
Give or take an hour, hour and 15 minutes, somewhere around there.
And I think you've told us that you did not directly see the shooting or the events leading up to the shooting. Is that
I
correct?
don't recall seeing those events, no.
Pass witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examine.
Sergeant, you've known Keith Sandy for some time, right?
Yes, sir.
Many years, is that correct?
Yes.
You coached baseball together, is that correct?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so you guys have a relationship where you will cuss from time to time with each other just in bantering back and forth, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you are familiar, aren't you, with this whole issue of some false reporting in the media about what conversation you and Mr. Sandy had, correct?
Very familiar with it.
You would agree with me, wouldn't you, sir, that Officer Sandy never said that he's going to shoot anybody in the penis or shoot anybody, right?
He never said that to me.
Yet that reporting has gone on for some months now, hasn't it?
Yes.
And the district attorney's office or the special prosecutors have never done anything to clarify the public record about that.
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Well, I think it's asking this officer to speculate, so I'll sustain the objection.
Beyond that, Your Honor, we just did clear the air of what was actually said in a public courtroom.
We have already ruled, I'll ask the defense to move on.
Thank you. You had a conversation with Mr. Boyd on that day on that hill, correct?
Yes.
He was completely irrational, is that correct?
Yes.
He was making no sense with what he was saying to you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Your conversation wasn't very long with him, was it?
No, it wasn't.
After that, you did see the K-9 officer, though, talking to Mr. Boyd, and you were from a distance, but you saw the K-9 officer talking to Mr. Boyd, trying to get him to cooperate, correct?
Yes, I did.
And every time the subject of the knives came up, Mr. Boyd would get more angry, correct?
Yes.
So you were still in the area, at least, when Mr. Boyd was when there was some type of discussions going on between the K-9 officer on the hill right in front of him and him, correct?
Yes, I was in earshot and I could see.
And so this officer, this K-9 officer, Weimerskirts, or perhaps you didn't know his name at the time, I don't know. Do you
Yes.
know? Do you know him?
His nickname is Scourge.
Skirch.
Yes.
Okay, just going by his nickname for a moment, you knew Officer Skirch, right?
Yes.
And you knew that he was a canine officer,
Yes.
and you knew that he was trying at that very moment, because you could hear it, you knew that he was trying to talk with Mr. Boyd in a way to get him to drop the knives and come down the hill. Is that correct?
Objection calls for speculation.
He said he's heard it.
I'll allow him to answer the question. Overruled.
He was trying at length to get Mr. Boyd to come down the hill and cooperate.
And Sergeant, when you say at length, describe what at length means.
It wasn't just a couple minutes that he was trying, it was at least an hour.
And you were on the side of that mountain an hour, and those gentlemen that, and I would call them tactical units for less tactical individuals for lack of a better term, but Skirch, Officer Keith Sandy, and I don't know if you know Sergeant Ingram, now Sergeant Ingram, but Officer Ingram, they were there for a while, weren't they?
Yes.
In fact, it's your understanding, based on what you've already testified to, that you got there at about the same time that Officer Sandy got there, right?
Yes.
Because he was out there when this conversation took place. He was suiting up, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And when I say suiting up, I mean putting on protective gear, right?
Load-bearing vest for his body armor and rifle, taser, shotgun,
And you've been in, I'm sorry for interrupting you, I didn't mean to.
handcuffs, mace, all.
And you've been involved in tactical units with the state police for years, haven't you?
Yes.
And the reason you put that on is to protect yourself from dangerous people, right?
Yes.
Did Keith Sandy at that time of that conversation, or at any time, ever indicate to you that he had any intentions of shooting Mr. Boyd?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for hearsay.
Ask him if he expressed to him any intentions.
Well, I agree. It does call for self-serving hearsay, so if you can rephrase it in another form, I'll allow you to ask the question.
Did Mr. Sandy ever say to you that he was going to shoot Mr. Boyd?
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Were you ever concerned at any time that Mr. Sandy had the intention of going up and shooting Mr. Boyd?
No.
Objection, foundation, relevance.
I'll allow it as lay opinion. Counsel overruled.
You're not giving any opinion on the tactical, the Albuquerque Police Department's tactics involved at the specific time Mr. Boyd was shooting, correct? Was shot, correct?
Every incident can be handled differently, so I'm not going to give an opinion on tactics.
Okay. Now, I think you said you've been an officer, stayed with the state police, and now you're a sergeant for 18 years?
Yes.
During that time, have you gotten training in how to deal with people that are, for example, perhaps using knives against you in a close area?
Yes.
What does that training tell you in general about the threat of someone with a knife?
Well, there's a drill called the Tooler drill that we train on initially, and it's basically an attacker with a knife from 21 feet will attack somebody, an officer, armed, and get to that officer before the officer gets shot off to stop the threat.
And do you consider someone with a knife in close proximity to you, if he is brandishing that knife, a deadly threat?
If there's no obstacles to take cover behind, yes.
And what is your understanding of your training if someone in close proximity, say less than 10 feet, what is your understanding of your training? What is your response supposed to be if someone attacks you with a knife or threatens?
Objection, ultimate issue, Your Honor.
Well, I agree, and I think we're getting beyond the scope of the direct exam, Mr. Bregman, so I sustain the objection.
Okay.
counsel. Good afternoon, Sergeant Ware.
Good afternoon.
Now, on March 16, 2014, you were dispatched to 1812 Piedra Vista, correct?
Yes.
And when you were dispatched, you were located in Edgewood, New Mexico.
Yes.
Is that where you were stationed at the time?
Yes.
How far is Edgewood from 1812 Piedra Vista, roughly?
15, 20 miles, maybe.
And it was your understanding that you were dispatched because Mr. Boyd had asked to speak with someone from state police, correct?
Yes.
So you drove that distance, 15 to 20 miles, simply to speak to Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
And that was at APE's request?
Yes.
Now, when you arrived at 1812 Piedra Vista, you parked out in front of a residence, correct?
Yes.
You went through a side yard, correct?
Yes, eventually.
And after going through that side yard, you walked through a gate and arrived at the base of the foothills, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, you saw several officers on the mountain, correct?
Yes.
And you also saw James Boyd.
Correct.
Is it fair to say that James Boyd was located at a significantly higher elevation than where you were at?
Yes.
Did that cause you any concern?
No, not at that time.
Now, after you walked through the gate, you proceeded to walk up to where the officers were located, correct?
Yes.
Shortly after that, you engaged Mr. Boyd in a conversation, correct?
Yes.
And that conversation lasted approximately 2 minutes.
Give or take, yes.
Why was that conversation so short?
I came to the conclusion that I wasn't talking to a sane person. Just the statements that he was making.
And what statements were those?
That he was an agent for the Department of Energy, and he was some kind of a killer, trained killer, and just off-the-wall stuff like that.
Now, you also mentioned that when you talked to Mr. Boyd about his knives, he would become agitated.
Yes.
Were you able to see the knives Mr. Boyd had?
No.
How were you aware that Mr. Boyd was in possession of knives?
I was told by the first APD, I believe is a sergeant, that he had knives in his pockets.
And you questioned Mr. Boyd about those knives?
Well, I brought it up. I asked him to put the knives on the ground and come down and talk to us.
And that led to him being agitated?
Yes.
Now, during your direct examination, there was mention of having Mr. Boyd move 300 feet to the east, essentially, correct?
Yes.
And what's located 300 feet to the east?
National Forest boundary.
Now, after you spoke to Mr. Boyd, based on the observations you made of him and the things he said and did you believe he would be willing to move 300 feet to the east?
I didn't believe he was going to cooperate at all.
Now, after you spoke to Mr. Boyd for roughly 2 minutes, you moved back to the base of the hill, correct?
Yes.
Once you were at the base of the hill, what did you do?
I met with one of my officers and had him go on the north side of the hill with the K9, the APD K9 officer. I stayed at the bottom of the hill. I believe I met with another APD supervisor, and that's when I was told that he had threatened the officers with knives.
And how long did you remain in that position at the bottom of the hill?
As I said earlier, probably an hour and 15 minutes.
And you were there at the time of the shooting?
Yes.
But you didn't actually see the shooting, correct?
No.
You didn't see the events that occurred immediately before the shooting, correct?
I could hear the Officer Skirch, Warmer Skirch, talking and trying to get him to come down and drop the knives and come down and talk to us. That whole entire time. That's all I recall hearing.
But you didn't actually see the shooting itself?
No.
Now, throughout your long career in law enforcement, have you had an opportunity to work with Officer Dominic Perez?
Yes,
You're familiar with his appearance?
yes,
And on March 16th, 2014, you were familiar with Officer Perez's appearance.
yes.
Do you recall during the time, well over an hour, during the time you were at the scene of the March 16th incident, do you ever recall seeing Officer Perez?
I believe he was with Officer Sandy and Officer Weimerskirch.
At the end, when the shooting occurred?
Yes. I don't recall seeing him coming up the hill.
So prior to the time the shooting occurred, you did not see Officer Perez at this incident?
I don't recall seeing him.
May I have a moment to confer, Your Honor?
Yes.
And Sergeant Ware, during your time at the March 16th incident, you didn't hear Officer Perez say anything disparaging about Mr. Boyd or anyone else, correct?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Well, I'm not so sure. I think he didn't hear anything, so I'll allow the question to be asked and answered.
I don't recall hearing anything from Officer Perez.
Thank you, Sergeant Ware.
Do you have any redirect, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Sergeant Ware, we need to go into your training on direct examination, as the court pointed out, but there was something that you were asked on cross that I think you just need to clarify very briefly. You're talking about the Tooler drill, and I think you represented to the court that your understanding, or what you told the court, was that the Tooler drill means that an individual armed with a knife 21 feet away can get to an officer before an officer can shoot them, is what you said.
That's from the holster, yes.
That's the point I wanted to make clear. Is it correct that the Tooler principle and the Tooler drill is that assumes an officer not expecting an attack and with their weapon in the holster at the time?
That specific drill, yes.
Nothing further.
Sergeant Wright, forgive me, but I'm still not fully clear on this issue about 300 feet to the forest. Whom did you mention that to when you suggested moving Mr. Boyd 300 feet to the forest?
I believe it was one of the APD sergeants that I had met with. I don't recall his name, but I had met with him and asked him if that option had been given prior to my arrival.
And when you had contact with Mr. Boyd, did you suggest that to him at all?
No, I did not.
All right, thank you. You may sit down. May he be excused from the case, State?
He may, Your Honor.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. State, do you have another witness, please?
We do, Your Honor. Brock, knee press.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, Your Honor.
Please be seated.
Good afternoon, Officer Newport. Can you introduce yourself to the court, please, and tell them what you do for a living?
My name is Brock Niprath, and I work as a full-time salaried law enforcement officer for the Albuquerque Police Department.
And were you one of the two CIT officers who responded to James Boyd in the first hour or so he was on the mountain?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
Can you explain for the court what a CIT officer is? And maybe let's start with what CIT stands for.
CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Training. The purpose of the CIT program is to equip certain field officers to deal with individuals that are either suffering from mental disabilities or handicaps, or those people that are just suffering a crisis situation.
Do CIT officers have special training that regular field officers don't have?
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of training is that?
After the academy, we applied to receive a special 40-hour block of training that includes scenario-based training and advanced training in dealing with people with mental illness.
When you say scenario-based training, do they actually play act with you, someone being mentally ill, and how you deal with that?
That's correct, ma'am.
All right. And was that helpful for you, that training in understanding how to deal with mentally ill people on the street?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And what then do they use the CIT officers for once they come out of their training? How are you utilized on the force?
We generally tend to respond to what we would call mental patient calls, or individuals with known mental illness. Oftentimes we're responding to suicide calls because we're trained in large part in de-escalation skills. And so our basis for training is dealing with people that are in crisis to de-escalate them from their state of crisis into a cooperation state.
Okay. In your training, did they talk to you about dealing with homeless and mentally ill citizens?
Yes, ma'am.
Is the homeless population at greater risk of being a victim of crime than someone with a home?
You know, I couldn't answer that, ma'am. I don't know whether that's a true statistic or not.
Okay, I'm just wondering if that was something they covered in your training.
Not that I recall, ma'am.
What kinds of risks do homeless people have living on the street without a home?
I mean, they're open to the dangers of weather. They are open to crime. They have just different problems than most people with homes have.
Yeah, I think the most recent example is the fellow who was sleeping by the side of the road and people threw fireworks on him and set him on fire. Did you hear about
Just
that?
relevance, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Is it, in your training, did you learn that a large percentage of homeless people sometimes suffer from mental illness?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Why is that? Why did they tell you in your training that many homeless people suffer from mental illness?
In large part because due to their mental illnesses, they either can't afford a home or choose not to live in a home because of either the delusions they have or the side effects of their mental illnesses.
Okay. And are there any problems with them living in a place like a homeless shelter, homeless people? I mean, the mentally ill people.
It depends on what they're diagnosed with. Not all people with mental illness or mental disabilities would be considered dangerous. Some are, some aren't. So it depends on what the diagnosis is and how they behave.
And can some people with some certain diagnoses, when they're around people, exacerbate their concerns and their problems?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, mental illness is not something that people choose, is it?
No, ma'am.
Who can be afflicted with mental illness?
Anyone can.
Is anyone immune from being afflicted with mental illness no matter what age they are?
Not to my knowledge, ma'am.
Lawyers can be afflicted with mental illness?
Yes, ma'am.
Judges?
Yes, ma'am.
And even police officers?
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, in one of the great ironies of this case, one of the officers who responded to the scene of the Boyd shooting was diagnosed with mental illness shortly after this encounter. Is that not correct?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Relevance, Your Honor.
This is sustained as to relevance.
People suffering from different types of mental illness may respond in different ways to a situation. Is that right?
That's correct, ma'am.
And were you trained to deal with people suffering from something called paranoid schizophrenia?
As I said, we do scenario-based training, and in some of the scenario-based training, we do deal with individuals that exhibit the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, Your Honor.
And how do you recognize somebody who's suffering from paranoid schizophrenia?
In large part, just based on their behavior. We ask them questions. Are you hearing voices? Are you seeing things? And we ask them to elaborate on what they're hearing or seeing, because audio and visual hallucinations is a cue for us that someone might be suffering from a mental illness. We also, when we're talking with them, we listen to what they're saying. They might exhibit delusions of grandeur, saying that, for example, they're the King of France, or that they're Jesus or God. We also look for what we call paranoid tendencies, statements like someone's out to get me, I'm being followed, or I'm being chased by aliens, that's why I wear the aluminum foil on my head, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Do they also sometimes have delusions about being spies or agents or high up in the government, things like that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Are CIT officers trained about particular how to diffuse or effectively respond and diffuse and de-escalate dealing with particular kinds of mental illness?
What we're given is a tool set, and it applies generally to people with mental illness and people in crisis. There's not one specific way that we're trained to deal with someone that's bipolar versus someone that's a paranoid schizophrenic.
Right. What are the techniques that you're trained for dealing with mentally ill citizens?
We use what we determine as what they call a hook. And basically what that is common ground or rapport that you can build with the individual to de-escalate them and get them to cooperate. If you're dealing with someone, like, say, for example, a hostage situation, you want to build a rapport with them over, common ground. Do they have a family? Okay, well, your family doesn't want to see you like this, to get them to cooperate.
And do you do that by asking them questions about themselves?
Yes, ma'am. We do that by engaging in conversation with them.
And trying to find something that you can connect with them on, is that right?
That's correct, ma'am.
What is the approach as to whether you want one person talking to them or a bunch of people talking to them while you're trying to establish rapport?
The ideal situation is to have one individual talking at a time. We want them to go through one individual so that way they're not having to listen to 3 or 4 people talk or 3 or 4 people saying 3 or 4 different things. We want them focused and engaged with one person at a time.
Okay, and why is that?
Just because we don't want them getting conflicting commands. We want one person to be the point of contact. If something needs to be accomplished, we try and go through the one person that is building a rapport and is engaging with them.
Do you try to keep, if they have established rapport with one person, do you try to keep that person on scene to deal with them throughout whatever the encounter is?
As long as they're having that rapport, we try and keep them engaging as long as possible.
All right. Why do you want to use the one person who's had some rapport with them?
Generally because they've been engaged in the conversation longer and they've built up that experience with that person, and the person that we're dealing with is more likely to cooperate with them if at all possible.
If you bring in a new person to swap out for the person who's been dealing with them, is there any kind of process in place where the new person should talk to the person who's been talking to them to find out what's been gone over already?
In an ideal situation, yeah, you should brief the person coming in.
All right.
It doesn't always happen, and it's not a set policy or procedure.
And if this person has been working with someone for a while, they know all the different things that have been tried so that you don't have to start over when the new person comes on?
Just leading.
Rephrase.
Can you tell me another reason why you might brief the person that comes on second as opposed to the first?
Because we want to know what works and what doesn't. Another term that we use in CIT is what we call a hot button or hot issue.
Hot button?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Generally, people with mental illness have certain things that escalate them and certain things that de-escalate them. So in the course of talking to them, you may hit a nerve and something that escalates them, and then that's an issue that you want to stay away from, and everyone else should try and stay away from as best as they can.
And if someone that's coming on the scene communicates with the first person who's been there, can they learn those hot button issues if they ask them about that?
They should be able to get a decent idea of what topics they should stick to and what topics they should avoid.
All right. Is it APD policy that when you are at a scene like this where you're dealing with someone with mental illness, that it's best to have a CIT officer be the one who is dealing with that person because they have training?
I believe that's correct, ma'am.
What kind of things de-escalate a situation?
Ideally, we want to get them to stop thinking about what's going on and try and redirect them into something that they care about. Like I said, individuals, families, sometimes pets, they care about their pets, and try and assure them that the situation can be solved without any violence or use of force, and try and get them to de-escalate and cooperate on their own.
Are there any other kind of techniques that you can use to help de-escalate the situation?
A lot of times we ask questions and get people just to talk. Sometimes people have grievance and they just want to be heard, and so in talking to an officer and getting their opinion out there, their grievance out there, sometimes they'll de-escalate on their own.
Is there a time limit on CIT officers talking to somebody, or a time limit on de-escalation?
Not that I'm aware of, ma'am.
And what is your training about how long you stay out there, depending on how long it takes to de-escalate the situation?
Our training is we stay out there as long as it's reasonably safe to do so, or until we're told to leave either by our crisis negotiation team, which is a level higher than we are for CIT, or ordered to do so by a field supervisor.
Okay. Now, crisis negotiation team, do they have even more training than CIT officers?
Yes, ma'am, they do.
Before March of 2014, did APD have a program to deal with mentally ill people living in Albuquerque?
We've had the CIT program for a while, and that's been our primary unit for dealing with the mentally ill. We have our CIT field officers, which is what I am, so I'm a patrol officer that has additional CIT certification. We also have our CIT unit, which is a group of detectives and a sergeant and lieutenant that handle more high-risk cases and things that need more follow-up that a field officer can't do.
Was there a program in place in March of 2014 where actually, for people who lived here in Albuquerque, a CIT officer would be assigned to that person?
I believe there was, ma'am.
And why was that put into place?
Like I said, some individuals need more follow-up than others. In some cases, we can get people assistance and get them taken care of. Other people need constant management.
Objection to relevance. CIT officers assigned, unless there's going to be some foundation that this gentleman was assigned to Mr. Boyd or something, which I don't think is the case.
How response?
The response is that, in fact, there were 2 officers assigned to Mr. Boyd who should have been called out to this call. Sergeant John Gonzalez and Officer Matt Tinney were assigned to Mr. Boyd.
All right, I'll overrule the objection, allow you to proceed.
Officer, I think I've now forgotten what I was asking you about. What was the purpose of assigning officers to particular people, I think is where we were.
Like I said, some individuals need more time and attention than others. When you're dealing with the mentally ill and homeless population, one of the issues we run into is medications and follow-up. And what we like to do is we try and limit the number of calls for service. So them calling the police or calls to police because of these individuals by having them have a go-to person that they can contact.
All right. And over time, if the person can build a relationship with a homeless person over time, or a mentally ill person over time, is that helpful in dealing with the person in the future?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And how is that helpful?
Well, as I said before, we have hot buttons and hooks, and someone that's been dealing with an individual for an extended period of time is not only going to have a better rapport with them, but is also going to have a better knowledge base for de-escalating them.
Sergeant John Gonzalez is there in the CIT unit with you, is that right?
I believe he is.
And Officer Matt Tinney was also in the CIT unit with you?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you aware that they had been assigned to James Boyd for about the 2 years before this incident happened?
I have after the fact, but I don't believe I was at the time. No.
Okay. Do you know that now, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And were they able to successfully deal with James Boyd without any kind of violence during the 2
There's no
years?
objection. We're going way off on a tangent here. There's been no evidence provided whatsoever of this. I don't know if this is based on hearsay or him just saying this. Your Honor, I think we're going far afield of what's relevant as to whether or not these officers.
Response?
Your Honor, I think it is relevant that APD should have called these officers out and should have known that these were the people who dealt successfully with him over the last 2 years.
I'll allow you to proceed. Go ahead.
I wouldn't have any information on their specific interactions with Mr. Boyd.
Okay. In any event, on March 16th, 2014, nobody called Sergeant John Gonzalez or Officer Matt Tinney to come deal with Mr. Boyd, did they?
As far as I know, no, ma'am.
All right. Does APD train you on how to keep yourself safe while dealing with someone who is mentally ill?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk about how you do that?
One aspect of it, ma'am, is we like to keep our distance. We don't want to close in on them or agitate them. We said we want to stay away from hot buttons and keep them as calm as possible. We like to maintain distance and maintain dialogue. We also like to have backup or assisting officers with what we call a force array, so different use of force options available to us should we need to use them.
Okay. And does that include both non-lethal and lethal force?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask you about distance, because how does that work when you're dealing with somebody as far as keeping yourself safe?
There's a drill that they teach us in the academy. It's called a tool drill, and it's a nationally recognized drill. And what it is, it's used for dealing with people with armed weapons. In a particular case, it says that if you're dealing with an individual with armed weapons and you're at a distance of, at the time when I was trained, it was 21 feet, but I believe now they've extended it to 31 feet. That if an individual with an armed weapon attempts to close distance on you or come at you, and you have your weapon holstered, that they can close that distance and stab you in roughly about the same amount of time that you can draw and attempt to shoot them.
Okay.
So we like to keep our distance for those kinds of reasons.
And do you try to keep approximately that distance?
If at all possible. I mean, in some cases it's not possible. In other cases, if it's at all possible, we'd rather use a phone to contact them and distance ourselves even farther from the situation.
All right. And I think maybe you spoke, do you mean an edged way, if they have a knife?
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
what that drill is for?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. And if a person moves towards you, what can you do to keep distance?
We can either back up or use what we call an intermediate barrier, depending on the situation.
Would it ever be appropriate for an officer to deliberately step within that danger zone just so he could shoot a person?
It depends on the circumstances around the case.
Do non-lethal force options still hurt people?
To a degree, depending on the individual, whether they have a low or high pain tolerance, whether they're under the influence of substances such as alcohol or narcotics.
All right, and how does a handheld taser hurt people?
A handheld taser has two functions. It has a standoff mode and what they call a drive stun mode. The standoff mode is the use of two prongs connected to wires, and what that does is that upon both prongs contacting the skin, will deliver an electric charge that causes what we call neuromuscular incapacitation. Basically, it locks out the muscles and prevents people from using that.
All right, and what is the range of a handheld taser?
They have different ranges, different lengths between, I believe it's about 15 and 30 feet, depending on which cartridges you have.
And is every APD officer issued a handheld taser?
Yes, ma'am.
And did all the officers out there at the scene on March 16th have handheld tasers?
Objection to the extended calls for speculation.
I believe he can testify to what he saw, so I'll allow him to answer the question.
In terms of the field and patrol officers, I believe that we all had tasers. I can't speak for the SWAT team.
Okay. And then there's something called a taser shotgun. Can you explain what that is?
The taser shotgun is a different taser platform. What that is it's a shotgun type weapon that has a self-contained taser cartridge that can be fired at greater distances than a handheld taser and has a longer electric cycle.
All right. And what is the range of a taser shotgun?
To be honest with you, I'm not trained in taser shotgun, so I couldn't tell you the effective ranges.
We'll ask somebody else. It's longer, certainly, than 30 feet. Is that right?
Objection to the calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Let me rephrase the question. The taser shotgun was invented to give you more distance than the handheld taser.
Objection calls for speculation.
He already testified he's not trained in that kind, so I'll sustain the objection.
Talk to me about beanbag shotguns. How do those work and what are those supposed to do?
Beanbag shotguns are another one of our less lethal options, and they're another shotgun platform, and they contain a beanbag round, and it's used as a sort of long-distance impact weapon. They're fired at high velocity and are used for pain compliance.
All right, and what pain compliance means, if it hits you, it hurts.
That's correct.
All right, do you know what that feels like? Have you ever had one shot at you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Have you seen the reaction of people when they're hit with a beanbag round?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is their reaction?
Again, it depends on the individual and what their circumstances are. Some people believe that they've been shot with an actual shotgun and they fall to the ground. I've seen other people take 10, 15 beanbag rounds and they still are standing up.
Those are people that are on drugs sometimes?
Sometimes.
All right. And then tell me about the canine dogs that are used for a less lethal option. How do those work?
The canine dogs are run by the canine handlers, and depending on the circumstances, they can be deployed to apprehend individuals. In most cases, when we're talking about a canine bite, we're looking at a felony charge because it's the dogs in and of themselves are pretty nasty little creatures, and they do tend to inflict a lot of damage when they bite somebody.
All right. And even though you just see a dog shaking somebody's leg, they're actually trained to bite and hold.
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
Let me rephrase. You said they sustain a lot of damage. Can you explain to the court how that happens with a dog?
From the bites I've seen, a lot of times they are trained to bite and hold, and people trying to pull away, a lot of times you'll see muscles or skin rip and pretty significant bites from a dog.
All right. In your training, when they talk to you about when would be a good time to arrest somebody, they talk to you about whether it's a good time to arrest them when their hands are occupied with something else?
There's not a specific set time to say this is the best time or this is the best practice to arrest somebody.
Right, I think my question was probably bad. Are there times that are better than others to try to effectuate an arrest?
Well, we have two types of handcuffing techniques. The first type is what we call compliant handcuffing, and that's when a subject is calm and cooperative and is following verbal commands, at which point we can give them verbal commands to either put their hands on their head or behind their back and to turn around. We also have what we call non-compliant handcuffing, which is when we either use a kneeling or a prone position. So when someone's not being cooperative with us or has fought with us or is not being cooperative at all, that's the position we want them in because it's the least dangerous to us to handcuff them.
All right. Are there times when they're doing certain things with their hands that make it safer for you to approach them and to try to handcuff them or to take them into custody?
Yes, ma'am. Ideally, if their hands are behind their back or interlaced with fingers, that's the best time.
Okay, if they have something in their hands, what does that mean to you as an officer?
It means that they have something that they can either throw at me or hit me with.
Okay. If it's a thing like a suitcase or some luggage, is that what you're thinking about, or are you thinking that they're occupied with that as opposed to other things?
It can be really any object. If they have an object in their hand, depending on what the object is, most objects can be used to hurt me or someone else in some form.
Let's talk about March 16th of 2014. Do you believe that a citizen has a right to defend himself against excessive force by the police?
Objection calls for legal conclusion, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain the objection, counsel.
Okay. Tell me about the call that went over the air and why you went up to the mountains on March 16th.
We received a request for backup from two of the open space officers saying that they were dealing with an individual who had been camping in the foothills and had brandished knives towards them during the interaction.
Okay. Did anybody put out over the radio that it was actually the open spaces officers who first pulled guns on Mr. Boyd before he pulled a knife?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever learn that fact before you responded to the scene?
No, ma'am.
Was that something that Mr. Boyd complained about while you were there and he was talking to the officers?
He vaguely referenced us pointing guns at him, but at the time there was a fair number of guns pointing to him, so I assumed that he was talking to us.
Okay. Did you ever hear him say, "You're the ones that assaulted me"?
I believe he did say that several times.
All right. Who was there when you arrived?
When I arrived on scene, there was the two open space officers, Officer Michael Monet, Officer Chris Weatherland, and Sergeant Carpenter.
And those were all field officers?
Yes, ma'am.
And what does it mean to be a field officer?
It means that we respond to calls for service. Anytime someone calls 911, a field officer is going to be the one to respond.
And how are they dressed?
We're dressed in full uniform, displaying our badge of office with the appropriate markings.
Black uniforms?
They're navy blue.
Okay. Do all APD officers, are they all issued bulletproof vests or body armor of some kind?
Yes, ma'am.
And is it a required part of your uniform?
Yes, ma'am.
And to your knowledge, I know you can't see it because it's under the vest, but if you're wearing the uniform, you've got the body armor on, is that right?
Should be.
What did you see when you arrived?
When I arrived on scene, I saw the individuals that I mentioned before, the two open space officers, Officer Weatherland and Officer Monet, dealing with Mr. Boyd along with Sergeant Carpenter. They appeared to be standing in kind of a straight line relative to his position and slightly lower than where he was on the side of the hill.
So what did you do?
When I arrived on scene, I saw that Officer Monet was already conducting the CIT portion of the call, and he's a CIT officer, and he seemed to be at least able to engage Mr. Boyd in some type of dialogue. So I spoke with Sergeant Carpenter and advised him that I was moving to a higher ground position so that we could get what we call a tactical L.
Can you explain what that is?
A tactical L is positioning that we like to use in police work, and what it is one individual either directly in front of behind the individual and another officer to the side, so that way should we have to...
Like this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So that way should we have to either use some type of force, either shooting or other things that officers aren't getting into a crossfire situation, and we're just kind of spreading out so that we can't be attacked at the same time.
Can you talked about crossfire. You don't want to line up across from each other because if you have to shoot, you might hit another officer.
Actually,
Could you explain crossfire, please?
Crossfire is a situation where you have two individuals in a position where if they open fire, there's the potential that they could hit each other.
When you arrived, did any of the officers have their guns out?
Yes, ma'am.
Who had their guns out?
I believe the two open space officers had their pistols out, and I believe Officer Weatherland had a beanbag shotgun.
Can you talk about how things developed after you arrived there?
After I arrived on scene and moved to the position a little higher up on the hill than everyone else, where I could have a better vantage point, Officer Monet continued to try and de-escalate Mr. Boyd. And Mr. Boyd was fairly up and down. At times he would calm down, then he would re-escalate, then he would calm down. And he kept requesting for the state police, saying that he didn't want to deal with us, he wanted to deal with the state police.
How would you describe his position when you say he'd go up and down?
I mean emotionally.
All right.
When I say he's escalating, going up and down, I mean he's becoming agitated, and then he's calming down, and he's becoming agitated again.
Okay. how long did it take you to determine that he was mentally ill?
During our initial contact with him, he had made several statements about being a secret agent and being directly tied to the nation's economy and having information that could crash the stock market. For those of us that are CAT trained, like I said, those are cues that someone may be suffering from mental illness.
You didn't believe that those were all true?
No, ma'am.
All right. At some point, was Officer Monet able to de-escalate the situation enough where everybody put their guns away?
No, ma'am. I don't believe he was ever able to accomplish that.
Okay. Did the field officers, including the open space officers, put their guns away?
Not that I'm aware of, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to show you a picture in a second. What was your role in this group of field officers that were up there?
At the time that I arrived on scene, I was carrying an AR-15 .223 weapon, which is a long gun. So due to the way we were set up, I moved to a higher position and was maintaining cover on Mr. Boyd as a lethal contingent in case something happened.
All right, and let me hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 26D. And can you identify this as how the position of how the officers were arrayed on March 16th after you arrived, the field officers?
That does appear to be correct, ma'am.
Okay, are you depicted in that particular photograph?
I don't believe so, ma'am.
Go ahead, move 26D.
B?
D as in dog.
Okay. Any objection to 26D?
No.
No objection, Your Honor.
And Judge, if you could
It will
switch,
be admitted?
maybe you could switch that over to the Elmo, Judge. There we go. Officer Nipreth, can you tell me who this is here?
I believe that's Officer Weatherland.
Okay, here.
I couldn't tell you from the back of the head.
All right.
Same thing there, ma'am.
And how about these two down here?
Again, I couldn't tell you from this photo.
Do you remember if the open space officers moved back and were down here?
I don't recall.
Okay, and so where are you on this particular photograph? Are you off here somewhere?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And in this picture, nobody seems to have their weapons out except Wetterland with the beanbag shotgun. Is that
Judge
right?
Lee.
Rephrase, please.
Can you tell from this whether or not people at that particular point in time had put away their weapons?
Yeah, ma'am. Because of the way their bodies are positioned, and just due to the photo, we also have a position that's called a low ready. So it's not a full-out extended position like this, which would be visible in the picture. It's more down here that you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell from the photo whether they have their weapons out or not.
Okay. And the difference between this and this is a show of force versus a use of force?
Under our policy at the time, displaying a weapon without actually using it was considered a show of force.
Okay. During the time that you were up there with him, did you ever see him take out any knives?
Not that I recall, ma'am.
And do you rank sort of the postures that people have from passive to neutral to aggressive?
Yes, ma'am.
And what kind of postures did you see Mr. Boyd take on during the time that you were there?
Well, as part of postures, we also include verbal and nonverbal cues.
Sure.
In my time on the Hill, I heard Mr. Boyd threaten Sergeant Carpenter, saying that he didn't like him and that he was intending on hurting him, at which point he stuck his hands in his pockets where we believe the knives to be located.
But he never pulled them out?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. As far as neutral or aggressive or passive postures, did he go through all of those while he was up there, or?
Yes, ma'am. He kind of cycled through all the different stages. Like I said, he would calm down and then re-escalate, calm down and re-escalate.
Okay. Was there any time where he ever ran at the officers?
Not that I saw, ma'am.
And given the position of the officers, did you think they were in a safe position relative to Mr. Boyd?
I thought that position wasn't the best tactical position, which is why I moved to the higher ground.
Okay. Did you suggest to the other officers that they move back or move away from Mr. Boyd?
No, ma'am.
While the field officers and CIT officer Monet was talking to him, did anybody ever shoot him?
No, ma'am.
Are you trained in CIT that words can't hurt you?
What does that mean, ma'am?
that words alone can't hurt an officer?
No, ma'am. Threats alone don't actually hurt an officer, but they're an indication that a threat is either coming or that there's a potential for a threat.
Right. What do they train you about whether somebody says very obnoxious things to you, whether that gives you the authority or the legal right to use any kind of force on that person?
Depending on the situation, it just depends. If someone is armed and they say, I'm going to come at you and stab you, it sets us on a higher level of alert. If someone is, running around in their boxers saying, I'm going to shoot you, and we can clearly tell they have a gun, don't have a gun, then it, is not necessarily something we would consider as a threat.
Okay. What happened when the tactical team arrived?
When the tactical team arrived, I was advised by Sergeant Carpenter to leave my position and report down to kind of where people were rallying for reassignment for a perimeter.
When the tactical team arrived, were all the field officers pulled off the hill?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know who called up and made that decision?
To the best of my knowledge, I was told by Sergeant Carpenter that we were leaving and the tactical team was taking over our places. I don't know who made the decision, him or tactical, that was going to be what happened.
All right. As you came off the hill, did any of the tactical officers sit down with Sergeant Carpenter or Mike Monet or you to debrief on how the negotiations had gone?
I can't speak if they spoke with Sergeant Carpenter or Officer Monet, but they didn't speak with me.
Did anybody talk to you about what worked and what hadn't worked in dealing with Mr. Boyd?
No, ma'am.
Do you know why the decision was made to take Mike Monet out of talking to Mr. Boyd and put a new person on talking to him?
No, ma'am, I don't.
If I can have a second, Your Honor. Thank you, Officer Brent. Have the witness.
Counsel, let me just ask, it's about 4:40. Do you want to call it a day and continue with your cross tomorrow morning?
Yeah, Your Honor, if that's okay with you, I was going to rush through, but I prefer to do that.
If I can, Judge, Officer Niekreth is doing some training that is only being given in the next 3 days. And the reason we put him on this afternoon is so that he can get through his testimony and get back to his training program tomorrow morning. And he won't be able to repeat it for a long time if he can't go tomorrow morning. And he needs it to be able to be promoted in APD. That's why we put him on.
I'm sorry. How long is your cross going to take, Mr. Briggs?
Probably a half hour to 45 minutes, I'm thinking.
And
Probably about a half an hour to 45 minutes, Your Honor.
Could we bring him back perhaps tomorrow afternoon, Judge, so he can go to his training tomorrow morning?
at what time?
This same time in the afternoon, like 3 o'clock is what we were trying to shoot for with him, and put him on in the afternoon and have the cross done.
I prefer to put him on. I don't know about anything about this training and how important it is.
Do you have any objection to doing that, Mr. Bragg?
I guess not. I guess if that's the best thing we can work out. I'd rather do that than come short today.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, we'll have him back at around 3 o'clock tomorrow, and we'll continue with the cross-examination and redirect. All right, you can be stepped in.
And thank you for that consideration, Your Honor.